Welcome to The Explainer. We've all heard that phrase, a deal's a deal. But what happens when it isn't? Today, we're going to dive right into the legal playbook for when promises get broken. We'll look at how the law actually tries to fix things, the rules it has to follow, and get this, how it can even invent a contract out of thin air, all in the name of fairness.
All right, let's just get straight to the heart of it. Picture this. Someone makes a promise, a formal contract, and then they break it. The deal's off. So the big question is, now what?
Well, the law's answer to that question is built on a really old, really powerful idea. And that's the foundation of our first section here, what to do about a broken promise.
At the absolute core of contract law is this simple Latin phrase, ubi jus ibi remedium. It means, where there is a right, there is a remedy. Just think about that for a second. It's a fundamental guarantee from the legal system. It says, if you have a right and someone violates it, the law won't just shrug its shoulders. Nope, it promises to provide a fix, a solution.
So what does that fix actually look like? Well, in the world of contracts, the number one remedy is all about money, which brings us right into Section 2, making things right with compensation.
The main goal here is not about punishment. It's all about restoration. The law literally tries to put the injured person back in the exact financial position they would have been in if the contract had just been performed as promised. Here in India, this whole idea is captured in Section 73 of the Contract Act.
And this is such a critical distinction to understand. The law draws a super clear line in the sand. Its job is to compensate, not to punish. It's about filling the financial hole that the broken promise created. That's what we call compensatory damages. It is not about penalizing the other party. The entire focus is just on making you whole again.
Okay, but that kind of raises a question, right? Can you claim compensation for every single bad thing that happens after a contract gets broken? Well, not exactly. The law has rules to keep things fair. So let's explore those in Section 3, the rules of damages.
You can think of it like ripples in a pond. When a contract is breached, that's the stone hitting the water. The direct consequences are the first ripple, but the law has to decide how far out it's going to trace those ripples. That's this concept of remoteness of damages. It's basically a test to figure out which losses are just too far away from the original splash to be compensated. And the whole idea for this test comes from a really famous old case.
And that case is Hadley versus Baxendale. It's a 19th century English case, believe it or not, about a broken mill shaft, but the rules it established were so clear and so powerful that they became the bedrock for how we handle damages today, including right here in Indian law.
So here's how those two rules break down. The first rule is about ordinary damages. These are the obvious, totally foreseeable losses that happen in the usual course of things. The law pretty much assumes anybody should have seen these coming. But the second rule is for special damages. These are losses that pop up because of your unique situation. To claim these, you have to prove you actually told the other person about these special risks before the deal was even made. It's the difference between what they should have known versus what you actually told them.
All these rules can get a little complicated, which is why a lot of people try to avoid them completely by just planning for a breach right there in the contract itself. And that brings us to Section 4, planning for a breach.
So parties will often write in a clause that says something like, hey, if I breach this contract, I agree to pay you X amount. But the law is a bit skeptical. It looks at that number and asks, is that a fair, genuine guess of the likely loss? If it is, that's called liquidated damages, and it's generally okay. Or, is it a crazy high number designed to scare someone into performing? Well, that's a penalty, and courts really don't like those. And here is the absolute key takeaway, spelled out in Section 74 of the Indian Contract Act. That number you pre-agreed on in your contract, it's not a guaranteed payout. Think of it more like a price ceiling. A court will never award more than that amount, but it absolutely can, and often does, award less if it decides that reasonable compensation is actually a smaller number. The contract sets the limit, but the court gets the final say.
Okay, now for a really fascinating twist. The law can actually create an obligation for someone to pay you back, even when there was never a contract to begin with. This is our final section, contracts the law invents.
This brings up a super interesting question. What if there is no formal contract, but somebody still ends up with an unfair benefit completely at your expense? Well, the law has a very clever tool for this situation. It steps in to enforce fairness through a concept we call a quasi-contract.
Now, let's be clear.
These are not real contracts. Nobody signed a piece of paper. A quasi-contract is an obligation that's essentially invented by the law for one simple reason: to stop one person from getting unfairly rich at someone else's expense. It's the law creating a sort of pretend contract, all based on justice, equity, and just plain good conscience.
The whole idea of quasi-contracts is powered by this Latin principle, which basically just says, no one should get rich off of someone else's loss. This is the core doctrine of unjust enrichment, and it's all about preventing those unfair financial gains. The Indian Contract Act actually points to 5 key scenarios where this principle kicks in. For example, if you have to pay someone else's debt to protect your own interests, the law says you've got to be reimbursed. Or another simple one, if someone accidentally transfers money into your bank account, you have a legal duty to give it back. In every one of these cases, the law just steps in and creates an obligation where one didn't exist, all to make sure the outcome is fair.
So, from providing a remedy for every single broken promise, all the way to inventing contracts out of thin air just to ensure fairness, the law is constantly working behind the scenes. It's a really powerful reminder that our obligations to each other, well, they aren't just limited to the words written on a page. Which kind of leaves us with one last thought. Before your next handshake deal, what invisible contract might the law be creating for you?